All right, Chelsea fans, welcome back to another episode. That's right, of the London is Blue podcast. Hopefully, your favorite Chelsea podcast out there and a part of the Men in Blazers Media Network. Dan here, along with good friend Matt Law during an international break. And we are going to be breaking down a couple of thoughts around how Enzo Maresca's current performance has gone, any updates on the ownership situation. Will Chelsea ever have a front of kit sponsor again? Who knows? And a couple other juicy topics. But Matt, how are you spending your international break? It's usually covering the England's men's team. It's probably looking at the fact that Cole Palmer continues to get rave reviews from club and country. Anything else?
Cole Palmer, England Player of the Year. Cole Palmer,
yes,
who has won England Player of the Year, having been an England player for less than a year, an England senior player. I think he made his debut last November, and by this October, he's won Player of the Year, which again is a massive sort of statement of his impact and everything. And just to dwell on that, I actually think as well, Cole Palmer being named England Player of the Year, it's a general vote this gets done on, that gets put out through social media and whatnot. And while a lot of Chelsea fans will have voted on it, I do think it shows that he's now becoming very popular outside Chelsea as well, which I also think is really interesting because he's not a guy who gives loads of eloquent interviews. He's not a sort of media darling, media lovey, as you might say, you know, that some players can be. He's just winning over people with his pure performances and his sort of attitude on the pitch. People love it. Chelsea fans love it, but other people love it as well. And so I think that's really interesting that Chelsea now have a star at the club who's not just a star at their own club and among their own fans. He's a nationwide star in England now, and I would imagine in the not too distant future he will become a European and world star as well if he carries on. And Chelsea haven't had that for a while, actually. And so I think that's great for the club. I think that's great for him. I think he deserves all the credit for it. And yeah, like you say, I'm covering England. We're speaking today on Thursday afternoon. I'm going to Wembley tonight, where I am told Cole Palmer will start for England. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing him again. I've said this before on this show, I think, that, you know, it's now got like it used to be with Eden Hazard for me with Cole, that, you know, I used to really look forward to going to Chelsea, not just to see Eden Hazard, but predominantly to see Eden Hazard. I used to feel privileged. And it's like that with Cole now. You turn up at Chelsea thinking, I'm going to see something incredible today. I'm very lucky. I'm going to sit and watch one of the current best players in Europe, if not the world. And I feel like that going to England tonight. You know, I don't always feel enthused to go and watch England, but I do genuinely feel enthused to go and watch Cole Palmer play for England. And I'm hoping England can build a team around him in much the same way Chelsea are.
It's nice to know that he'll move from being potentially a substitute into a full-time starter at this point for the England national team as well. That maybe there's enough confidence now that his performances are not just a one-season wonder.
Yeah, I would love to know what Gareth Southgate would say to that question. I haven't had a chance to see Gareth Southgate since he's left the England job, and it'd be really interesting to talk to him about that now, because I would suspect he'd have to accept it was a mistake to leave him on the substitutes bench for the Euros. When you look at the momentum Cole had behind him, he was on fire. He showed in the tournament his confidence. You know, he scored in the final. He set up Ollie Watkins in the semi-final. It was there for all to see, and it was a real mistake for Gareth to go with what he knew rather than throwing in the man who was on fire. And it's easy to say with hindsight. I didn't necessarily at the start of the tournament think it was a mistake, but, you know, it's easy to say with hindsight. But I would love to hear what Gareth would say to that. And I do think the vote of Cole winning England Player of the Year is a little bit of a sort of the fans, I think, making their feelings clear to Southgate as well, probably on that, you know, not just Chelsea fans again, but England fans wanted to see him at that tournament and they were kind of denied the chance to. And I think that is probably reflected in that vote a little bit as well.
Well, we enjoy a vote of confidence for Cole Palmer on this show in particular, but I think one person who definitely enjoys him as well is his head coach, Enzo Maresca. And I mean, I think heading into this season, we had a lot of questions about how well the things would go for Chelsea in the start of the season, how well things would go for Enzo Maresca. And outside of a Crystal Palace performance and maybe a tough draw against Nottingham Forest, you might argue it's been pretty sunny for Enzo Maresca. I mean, what's your read on how well his performance has gone relative to what the club's expectation was of him heading into this first stretch of the season?
I think they're delighted with him. And what I think they're just as delighted as they are with results and performances. I think they're delighted with the comfort at which he's taken the role. He looks comfortable and feels comfortable and sounds comfortable as a Chelsea head coach. And I think they will be just as delighted with that, because I don't think they had any doubts around his ability. I don't think they had any doubts around the style of football. And they certainly internally don't have any doubts around the squad. They feel they've built an extremely good squad. I think probably the only question mark on Enzo Maresca that the people internally, couldn't answer until he took the job was how would he take on this job? He'd never coached before in a top division. He'd never coached before at a club like Chelsea, which, let's face it, is a beast. And the comfort at which he slotted into that, it's early days. We're only in the second international break, of course, but I think that will be a massive, massive thing internally for them, because I've been so impressed with that. He speaks with an assurance. He's comfortable in his own skin. He has despite the fact he doesn't have a huge coaching CV behind him, he still manages to have a gravitas behind him, I feel, in his presence. And, I'm still somebody who rates Graham Potter highly. I'm still somebody who rates Maurizio Pochettino highly. But clearly, with those two, I think it's acceptable to say that, that Graham did struggle with the transition into Chelsea. And I also think it's fair to say that Pochettino always had the Tottenham thing in the background with him that I don't think necessarily was fully sort of put to bed either by certain sections of fans or even by an awkwardness from him sometimes over it. And I haven't seen any of that with Enzo. He's just slipped into it really, really impressively. That's not to say I'm saying he's the best thing since sliced bread and he's going to go on and do this and that. It's far too early to start making bold predictions. But I think that is my biggest takeaway for him. The style of football has been good. There's still a slight naivety about them, but I wrote a piece the other week that Chelsea have named the youngest team in the division every single match week this season, and they're about 2 years younger than the next youngest. So there is going to be a naivety still about them. And I think it's very encouraging. I think results have been encouraging. I think results are probably slightly better than I expected, although I thought they would do quite well. But even with those draws, I think they're probably I thought they might have lost a silly one by now. I always expected them to lose to City on the opening day, and I know the 2 draws are frustrating, but I thought they'd have lost a silly one by now, maybe a Bournemouth away or even a Forest at home, something like that, and they haven't done. And the level of performance has been very encouraging. I think they've not necessarily, the Brighton match they kind of did, but they've not necessarily put together that level of performance throughout an entire 90 minutes yet. But you can see enough in games that you can feel quite excited about where things could head.
Yeah, I think that we kind of look at just some of the numbers, right? They 28 goals scored in the 11 matches that they've played. They played 10 matches across the same time period last season. They scored 14 goals during that time period. That's a nice thing for Chelsea fans to see. They have let in 4 more goals over that same kind of time period, but 7 wins versus 5. Both have having had 2 draws in that same time period, season over season, same there, and then 1 less loss too. So I mean, in general, results have been good. The expected goals allowed versus 4 would tell you Chelsea could have been as high as second place if you went by just simulating the matches, which is not the reality that we live in. And then you have the fact that we lost to Wolves, both times last season. We beat them once this season. You had the benefit of going away to Bournemouth and winning, which was a draw last season. So, I mean, in general, it feels like there's enough evidence here to say Enzo Maresca has done a fine job with the start of the season, that everyone who maybe had questions and concerns, rightfully so, about is this the right direction? Is this the right appointment? At least now has enough evidence to say, or to maybe pull back a little bit on criticizing or being as critical with the appointment because now there is some proof there.
Yeah, and do you know what I've noticed as well? The atmosphere at Stanford Bridge has been very good. The atmosphere against Nottingham Forest was excellent, and that was in many respects could be viewed as a frustrating game for Chelsea. They drew against an opposition that they wanted to beat. Forest went down to 10 men. The point they're going down to 10 men, even though there wasn't long left, a lot of Chelsea fans would probably expect them to win from there. They almost actually did win and almost lost it too. And yet there was no sense of real anger or frustration. I think last season there's a chance they'd have been booed off in that game, or certainly murmurs of discontent at a draw at the end of that game. And the atmosphere was really good. I mean, it was 1-1 and getting towards the end, and Chelsea fans were really sort of roaring, trying to suck the ball in for them. And I haven't always felt that at Stamford Bridge, even in some of the better days, I've got to be honest. And I thought that was interesting because I thought, and it was a very good atmosphere against Ghent as well. Again, could be a dreary atmosphere, Conference League. It's a bit of a C-list competition in a way. But I just get the sense that there's a connection starting to form between this team and these fans. And I think Parma obviously is a huge part of that because they've as any fan base would, they absolutely adore Cole Palmer. But then when you see how tight Cole is with Madueke, when you see how his relationship on the pitch seems to be going with Nico Jackson, when you see Levi Colwill at the back, who's a homegrown player and playing so well, I just think there's that connection coming back, and I haven't seen that again for a little while. And the fans are starting to fall in love with the players and the team again, and I think that's having a big impact. And I've noticed I went to the West Ham away game. I haven't been to many away games yet this season, but I have noticed sort of seeing little clips on social media and reading things and talking to people that, Enzo's had the team and himself going over to the fans to clap them at the end of games and stuff. And I just think that there's something building and growing there between the fans and the players, which I think is very, very encouraging. And that talks to what you say, that I think the fans, while things aren't perfect and while I couldn't sit here and confidently say, oh, Chelsea will definitely do this or do that or win this or win that at the moment, I think there's enough encouraging evidence and enough good underlying data that the fans can see it's heading in a good direction. They seem to be buying into that.
How do you feel about the upcoming test, though, considering the fact that the competitions start to get a little tighter in terms of timelines? Chelsea will have between now, the return after this international break into the middle part of November, 2 Conference League matches, a cup match against Newcastle. They'll be playing Newcastle twice in 3 days. They have the Manchester United match, which who knows, maybe it's Aaron Ten Hag's last match as Manchester United head coach, a match against Arsenal, and then the match against Liverpool right after the return. It feels like all of this might have been the midterm assessment, and now we're heading on to almost, it feels like a final assessment of the term for Enzo Maresca, with the difficulty being ramped up.
No, I mean, the difficulty is going to be ramped up, but he's got a massive advantage, and we're seeing it already in that he has these 2 teams to play. So, it's quite clear that the 2 Conference League games and the Carabao Cup game will probably be the other team. I don't like calling them the B team; it's a bit disrespectful, but the other team I'll call them, and that is a massive, massive advantage when you look at. United in the Europa League so far have had to play their first team pretty much. Every team in the Champions League can't rotate between Champions League and Premier League. Chelsea know that better than anyone. You have to play your best team in the Champions League. So that's 4 clubs who have to play their best team, sort of playing all these games. And you've got United who are having to do that because their squad, frankly, isn't very good. And I think that will eventually happen with Tottenham as well, because the Europa League is a demanding competition, and Tottenham will have to start playing more of a first-line team than perhaps Ange has done in the first couple of games. So I do think it's a massive thing for Chelsea and could really work to their benefit, and that Maresca is managing it well at the moment, in the short term at least, of having this second team available to him and keeping the first team fresh. And that'll be interesting in this run of games because all the clubs in Europe have a very tough schedule between these two international breaks now. I've been looking at Villa's and I'm a little bit concerned about it, if I'm honest with you. And I do think that it will take its toll on teams. And I do think Chelsea have an opportunity with those teams to maybe be a little bit fresher than others. However, their league fixtures are very difficult in this run. And look, I don't know whether it will tell us where they are or not, really, because if they lose to Liverpool and lose to Arsenal, I don't think that really tells us anything we don't know about Chelsea. I mean, we know that Chelsea are some way off Man City and Arsenal still and behind Liverpool. I'd say they're a bit closer to Liverpool than the other two, but realistically, I think that they can be the best of the rest this season. They can be fourth, and I think that's what we're probably, to be fair, judging them against is, are they going to be that best of the rest fourth team and make some progress on the other teams? And yes, to beat them would be progress, but to lose to them wouldn't necessarily mean that they're losing ground or anything on them like that. So it'll be interesting. It'll be more interesting whether they can compete, how the games go, because you can win one of these games but still not be anywhere near these teams. You can win one, luckily. It will all depend on the games, but it'll be a very different run for them than they've had. And I'm sure the time I've spent round Enzo at the moment, I suspect he's really looking forward to it and really relishing it and wants to see his team up against this Oppo, because the first week of the season is always a funny one. You know, playing Man City. Man City had a slightly strange team out. Chelsea, people like Cole Palmer, I still think was using that game as a bit of pre-season after not really having a pre-season. Chelsea weren't really sort of shaken down to where they are now. So now seeing them away at Anfield in sort of, we know their best team, we know that their players have now reached their sort of proper fitness levels. I think it'll be just really interesting to see how they approach that match and how they compete in it.
And if we were to get two draws against them, both Liverpool and Arsenal this season, it would be an improvement over last season's results, where it was it was a loss and a draw across both. So 1 point across the two fixtures for both. So 2 points out of the available 6. So if you could get 4 points potentially this season, that would be a step up from where we were last season.
I always try. I get sucked into doing this with Villa, but I always try and stop myself comparing the results with the previous season, because I just think the matches and the results go in different directions every year. And, you know, one year you might beat a Man City, but you'll lose to a Nottingham Forest, or you'll draw with a Sheffield United. And another year you'll sort of beat all those teams, but lose to the Cities and the Arsenals of this world. And I think the more interesting thing is, I am convinced this season that top 5 will get you Champions League. I've been looking at the coefficient and how it's going to pan out. It does look good. Yeah, and you know, with the teams in Europe and with Villa, I actually think Villa are a big part of this, bringing it back to my own club, which I always try and do, given the start we've had in the Champions League. I do think it will be a top 5, and looking historically to get into a top 5, you've got to be looking for about 63 to 65 points will probably guarantee you a 5th spot, which is eminently achievable. How you get those points, quite frankly, whether it's the same as last season or beating this team or drawing this, doesn't really matter. But I think any team that gets to 65 points this season will get in the Champions League through a top 5 finish, to be honest with you.
As the mass appropriately, you get Champions League and everybody gets a pretty happy end to the season here. I think one off the pitch situation that we highlighted earlier was just if there's any, or is there any updates regarding the ownership situation? We know heading into the start of this season, there was the Chelsea civil war in the boardroom, in the ownership office, and it's been pretty quiet since then. I mean, we've seen Badad at games, we've seen Todd at matches, not often pictured together anymore. So just if there's any update there, or it's still a wait until the end of the season and maybe things will be clearer then, because it feels like nobody will want to walk away from a club that's in the ascendancy now, whereas previously you could argue maybe you were concerned about your investment.
Well, what I was going to say is, as well as what I do think is definitely playing a factor at the moment, is that also neither side or neither man is going to want to be the guy blamed for destabilizing this. You know, it's going well it feels more encouraging than it's felt on the pitch at any time in their ownership, quite frankly. And neither man is going to be one of the guy who someone can point a finger at and say, yeah, everything was going great, and then he did this or he did such and such, and it all went horribly wrong from there and destabilised it. And there's quite a lot of positive sort of PR around Chelsea these last few weeks. You know, a lot of people who've been criticised them have suddenly started saying, actually, they're not bad, they're quite good. And maybe we can see a plan when we've been accusing them of having no plan for 2 years. And I do think that will be playing a part. You know, the last international window when it all blew up, the season had only just started and we didn't really know where things were going to go. And then since then, results have gone well in spite of that blow up and that civil war. And I think both men will be reticent to, well, both sides will be reticent to destabilise it at the moment. Also, let's face it, buying each other out or trying to buy each other out is not going to be a simple process. And it was never going to be the case of, oh yeah, in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to find out exactly what's happened. I always felt there'd be a calm before another storm. The other storm, which I've said on this show before, I think will come if and when one side makes a bid to the other side, because then decisions really have to be made. I think both men are quite happy sort of in the meantime as well. No one's going to, you know, Todd being at a women's match, Todd would have been in that women's match regardless. They were both at the West Ham game. I don't think that particularly meant anything. They both wanted to go to that game. They're probably both in London for other business interests as well. It did happen to coincide with Saudi being in London for the boxing, if you remember. We know that both men have big business links with Saudi, and they were all in London that weekend. And, you know, if they do go to the same game, their tickets are going to be next to each other. And it'd be a hell of a thing for one of them to actually refuse to sit next to the other one. So I just think it is, like I say, probably a bit of a calm before whenever the storm hits with those two, unless, and we shouldn't necessarily I've had no sense of this whatsoever, and I would say that at this stage it would be my predicted least likely outcome, but unless somehow they find a way whereby long term they feel they can carry on with the status quo. I doubt that, whether it's short term or long term, but at the moment I think they're letting everything tick along quite nicely in terms of on the pitch, because it is ticking along quite nicely.
And then also kind of from an office or kind of administrative item, Chelsea enter this international break, the second, without a front of kit sponsor again. Yeah. And seemingly doesn't feel like we're any closer, but do you feel like Chelsea might emerge from an international break, or, you know, at some point maybe in 2024, they'll have a front of kit sponsor?
I mean, look, to go over old ground, I think I've been over this before, but just to try and, for those who maybe haven't heard it or read it, you know, it's clear that they've had offers that they've rejected, because obviously those offers are aimed at pitching a size of offer whereby the club isn't in the Champions League. So I think Chelsea's 2 points are: you either pay us the money we think that we're worth, or we go for a lower one, but it's only a 1-year deal. And then we will put this out to tender again in readiness for hopefully being back in the Champions League next season, because the clubs certainly aren't going to sign a long-term agreement on non-Champions League money, because they do feel they'll be back there. That's where the biggest issue is at the moment. And clearly they've been in talks with lots of companies for a very long time. You know, one came up again the other week, and something could happen, but I've given up predicting, to be honest with you. Do I think they'll have a front of shirt sponsor at some point this season? Yes, I do. I think it'll probably be a short-term one and then go again, but I thought they'd probably have a short-term one by now. So like I said, I've slightly given up predicting it, but they clearly feel, I mean, we know what we do know with this ownership is they're quite happy to do things outside the box, and they clearly feel that they're better with none and losing that immediate income than signing something that they believe they could beat quite easily down the line if and when it becomes clear they're going to qualify for the Champions League. So they will be sort of, in their view, speculating to accumulate on this. Whether that works or not, I don't know. I do think it's odd, though. It's funny, actually, you say it, because I was at the Forest game at the weekend and was just looking at them, just thinking it's so bizarre they still don't have a sponsor yet. A club of Chelsea size, and there's no.
I mean, it does look sharp at times, though.
Sorry,
it does look sharp at times, though, to not have it. It's very old school.
Well, I don't like the kit, so I'm not going to get into that. But look, it's not great. It's not great. I will happily sort of listen to their reasoning, and I will take on board what they say in terms of why it hasn't happened yet and why it could still prove to be advantageous not to, but it's not great.
And then, I think an interesting one, I feel like you probably have more an opinion on this as it relates to things like sponsorship deals. We know that the Man City versus Premier League rulings have started to kind of trickle out, and we understand that Chelsea were actually one of the witnesses for Man City in their case. Not all clubs joined up to back them in their arguments. And so I'm just wondering if you have maybe an opinion rather than like specifics around, Chelsea's decision. Because again, not every club stepped up to support Man City, and it just can seem odd, I think, for some people on the outside trying to understand the motive behind why.
Well, look, first of all, as well, I would like to make clear, one thing I do know that isn't just my opinion is that it is a belief inside Chelsea and a lot of other clubs that the league operates stronger when everybody's together. And so I don't think Chelsea support City trying to tear the league apart, which some of this feels a bit like, when you hear that the lawyer then wrote to the clubs trying to get them not to go to the meeting that might happen next week and not to vote, and vague threats that clubs themselves could get drawn into legal issues if they vote for the Premier League on various things. I don't think Chelsea are supportive of that particularly. And I think Chelsea think that everybody needs to work together to find the best solutions for everybody in the league. So whilst I think they did have and do have some alignment with some of City's arguments in this, I don't think they're aligned with necessarily the way City have gone about it, because it does feel like City are trying to drag the league apart and create very, very defined sides, your team versus our team. And I know for a fact that Chelsea aren't into that. What I do suspect they're supportive of is Manchester City's questioning of the rules around APT and the fair market value of sponsorships. Because as we know, we've just been talking about, they don't have a front of shirt sponsor currently. But we know that they've had their own issues with this. They had a deal with Paramount pulled because that was going to clash against other broadcasters. They've had their own deal from last season, Infinite Athlete, delayed. That was delayed because that had to go through the fair market value process. And I think there was frustration around that. And I think they feel that they've got certain ties against them because of their associations with various companies, with obviously Clear Lake managing funds that, have so many links to so many different companies, and Todd and Eldridge having an enormous amount of links to different companies as well. I think they probably feel that it does impact them quite heavily. And I suspect that they would like a loosening of the rules around associated party transactions and associated party sponsorships. They won't want the rules, just completely ripped up. But I think they want to feel that they have the same opportunities that every other club does. And whether you will agree or disagree with this, I think they feel that they sometimes are having to operate slightly with a bit of a handheld behind their back because of their links to things. So that's where I think their sympathy with City comes in. The other interesting one, of course, is the business about ownership loans. Because Chelsea are probably in the top 6 of the ownership loans. I think they've got about 120 million of ownership loans, but that's not a model that their ownership is based on. So I don't think Chelsea are worried about that. Clubs aren't going to get punished retrospectively or have retrospective PSR things added on because they've taken big ownership loans that are interest-free or don't have to be paid back. But in future, it could become a PSR issue. But Chelsea's business plan and model under this ownership is not to operate with big loans. So I don't think they're worried about that. Interestingly, I think it would have been a big problem for the last ownership because, as we know, Roman was extremely generous with his money to Chelsea and would write loan after loan after loan that never had to be repaid, obviously never came with any interest and never had to be repaid. And that's basically how Chelsea operated. That's why a new stadium was never built. That's why they could continue paying the wages they did without being able to bring in the corporate money and the gate money that their rivals could, because Roman kept writing checks, and that's fine. That wasn't against the rules. I'm not criticising it. But now with what we see could be coming in with those shareholder rules and the fact that it will add on to your PSR, that would have been a big problem for Chelsea under the last ownership, actually.
Oh, good to get clarity within that and understand a little bit more about the ramifications, or why Chelsea is backing some of City's arguments, or from an opinion perspective there too. Another thing, just from like again, contractual kind of business type of updates. We've seen a couple of player contract extensions this season. I think probably to improve wages for performance, and then also never a bad idea to tie down players like Cole Palmer or Nico Jackson to a little bit of a longer term contract with Chelsea. Do you get the sense that there's any other players that Chelsea have on their roster currently that they're taking a look at, they're seeing some of the data, they're seeing how integral they are in the performance, and saying, you know what, we'd like to go ahead and extend them as well, or give them a salary bump to keep them happy based upon how they've been contributing?
This is it. It's more about reward than, we all laugh about the Chelsea contracts, and, it's quite funny because obviously, like, I think I wrote the other week, they've got about 8 or 9 players now under the age of 24 under who are on contracts till at least 2030. So from a contract length perspective, they're not going to run into any real problems anytime soon, and not really going to have to do anything anytime soon. So you're looking at players who will come under the umbrella of deserve reward, because what they have said consistently is, despite these long contracts, the contracts are designed to be able to reward performance, and that it won't mean that players are stuck on, they're not trying to put handcuffs on players to keep them on contracts whereby they will earn below what they are worth, their market rate. So there's been we've seen it with Cole and Nicholas Jackson. While they have added on years, and certainly with Cole, you'd want as many years as you could possibly get. You'd stick him on a 20-year contract if you could, quite frankly. But it's also about reward. So if I'm looking at the current squad and thinking, well, who's probably at a level whereby currently and towards the end of the season, that level could be significantly different, my first thought is probably Noni Madueke. Because Noni now is a full England international. This is the second squad he's been part of. He is, at the moment, a first-team regular, which is really the first time in his Chelsea career he's been a proper first-team regular, I would say. And he's really contributing. He scored that hat-trick against Wolves. He scored the equalising goal against Forest. He's been one of the better players of the opening weeks of the season. Now, it's going to be with consistency with him now. But if he carries on how he started this season, and this is pure guesswork on mine, I would imagine that he would be near the top of the list, if not the top of the list, who would probably deserve a reward, given on what I'm assuming he came in on when he joined the club. I think he is contracted to 2030. So the time-wise, it's not a problem. But I would imagine wage-wise might not necessarily reflect an England international first-team, absolute first-team regular within that squad. And that might be one who gets looked at some point, I'd imagine. Caicedo's already on big wages because he came in on such a big fee, and he again, I think, is 2030 or even past 2030. So I don't think there's going to be any need to rush into Caicedo. Colwill did one only last year, but they have shown a willingness with the younger players, and maybe Colwill's status will go up as well. So maybe he's another one. He's now becoming a very full England international. He's playing every game, so maybe Colwill could get rewarded. But Noni would be the one I'd pick out. I can't think of that I've necessarily forgotten anyone obvious.
I feel like the only one that might be interesting to keep an eye on this season in that grouping is maybe someone like, particularly if Reece James' health continues to be a major concern. Malagusto might be one if he can kind of contribute and stay healthy himself. He feels like he would be one on the cusp as well of
Yeah.
consideration for how do we continue to take care of and support this player.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is probably Noni, Gusto, and Colwell up there at the moment. I mean, I'm just looking down while I talk to you, actually, of who's under 2030, because obviously now Colwell's is 2029, but with a 1 year option, so you may as well say that's 2030. Fofana is 2029, but I'd imagine he came in on pretty good wages on 80 million transfer fee, and they'll want to know about his fitness for a while. So Reece is 2028, which is interesting. I mean, we're going to be summer 2025. That'll only be 3 years out with Reece, but again, his own fitness issues. I think that they're just going to have to see how things go a little bit with Reece.
Is there any thought on his timeline as we kind of maybe start to talk a little bit about just some of the kind of player
Yeah.
situations?
So I'm told that Reece is due back in. This is a little exclusive for you. I haven't even written this yet. Reece is due back in full training, all being well, next week, hopefully. So
Okay, that's very exciting.
It is. I mean, I'm always a little bit wary on these because Reece has
Mhm.
setback. He has a history of setbacks, and it might be that there's a little thing that happens and they decided to delay it again. But I know the hope is to get Reece back into full training at some point next week. And then I'm guessing, does he need 2 weeks in full training? Does he need 1 week in full training? I don't actually know. What we can be sure of is they're going to be damn careful with him. So
Yeah.
just because he gets back into full training, don't necessarily expect him to come back as fast as another player might do. But he is on the right road, and let's hope there isn't another setback from here. But Gusto's been doing well. There's no need to rush Reece. They've got a lot of games. So at some point, if they do need to get Reece some minutes, there'll be plenty of games in there to get him some minutes. He is in the Conference League squad, which is interesting. I think maybe that's a nudge toward where they'll start getting him some quote unquote easier minutes rather than keeping him out of that squad. So yeah, let's hope that timeline continues. But at the moment, the plan is next week.
And I think in general we've seen this season too that Chelsea have not, knock on wood, throw salt over a shoulder, don't walk under a ladder, have not run into major injury concerns at this point where you would have a injury list longer than a starting 11 or reserve bench. We know that there's been kind of large overhauls in the kind of the fitness and training end and the medical end. Are Chelsea looking at those having brought about positive changes? Do they feel like that's more representative of the way that the squad is being managed by Maresca? Is there a thought as to why this season has started off better than last season as it relates to player fitness?
Look, I'll be honest with this. I don't know, and I hate speculating on medical issues because I get myself into trouble. You're right. It has started better, and maybe it is to do with training, maybe it is to do with the style of play, or maybe it's just good luck. And yeah, I don't know, and like I say, I really don't like speculating on medical because I talk myself into trouble, and I'm going to swerve that one if you don't mind.
That's okay. We'll take all three. We'll take that it's an improvement of all three in some way, shape, or form, and that makes the full pie. Maybe last thing to kind of chat through is just obviously Chelsea did a lot of business over the summer. We've now had a chance to see several of the players who were either brought in or who have gone on to different teams get a chance to play for Chelsea or play at their new home. When you're looking back at it, do you feel like you've identified who the best acquisition, or at least current best acquisition, has been, and maybe the kind of jury still out acquisition?
Well, look, I've been really impressed with Sancho. I wasn't sure about that signing. I've got to be honest with you. I was a bit. Jadon Sancho has had such a bad time at Manchester United, and I just wasn't sure what we'd see from him, and whether you can just bring a player in and expect him to sort of almost forget about the Manchester United Jadon Sancho and go back to the one we'd hope we'd see. But he's started really well. I think it's 3 or 4 assists. He's playing well. He looks confident. He looks happy. And I tell you what, if he carries on like he's doing, that obligation for a deal worth in the region of 25 million going to be an absolute bargain, because you don't buy anything anymore for 25 million, quite frankly, and certainly nothing very good. And if that's the Sancho that Chelsea are going to end up signing permanently for 25 million, then they won't have just picked Man City's pocket on Cole Palmer. They'll have picked Man United's pocket on Jadon Sancho. But it's early days, so let's wait for the consistency. But I've been encouraged and impressed by Sancho. I think he's done really, really well, quite frankly. In terms of, I feel for Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. I've actually been really surprised that we haven't seen a bit more of him. Not necessarily because I expected him to start, but I just thought I didn't expect him not even to be on the bench, because I thought he was that link between Maresca and sort of getting to where he wants to go to. And I thought it was a clever signing from that point of view, to have a player who knew what you're all about, knew what your style is, to have a bit of a supporter on the training pitch and in the dressing room, and also to maybe have on the bench if the team aren't quite managing to play how you want, and you can bring a player on who should be able to play how you want to play. So I feel a bit sorry for him. It hasn't quite gone for him how I expected it to yet. And like I said, I've been surprised that he hasn't even been on the bench. But maybe, he did score in the Conference League, and clearly he's going to play regularly in the Conference League to start with. So maybe that will help him. But that's the one. So if Sancho's kind of surprised me pleasantly, that's the one that's slightly the other way at the moment, I think. And then a lot, it's still a lot of players that were already there, quite frankly, isn't it? When you look at what the first team is, most of that first team that's playing were already there. And Maresca did say when he came in that he fell in love with the squad, and it's clear that he really rated a lot of the players that were already at the club and felt a lot of those players could do what he wanted to do. I mean, look at the transformation in Cucurella. I don't just mean under him either, because Cucurella was playing well yesterday, but just look at the transformation of Cucurella, of how he's viewed by fans now and how his position within that squad. The fact he's suspended for the Liverpool game. Actually, talking of players who've come in and done well, coming on to him is Vega. Vega's done well when he's played. He looks a talent. But talking of that Liverpool game with Cucurella suspended, even though Vega's done well, you want Cucurella in there at the moment. But Vega would fit in the signings as well, who's pleasantly surprised me. I had no idea what to expect of him, quite frankly, and he looks a talent.
And maybe kind of to end on that note of just cards for dissent and discipline in Chelsea's reoccurring issue at the moment of being unable to avoid cards and disciplinary issues. It feels like there's just been a couple outlier matches that Chelsea have played that have been heavily carded that have driven up that number. But it does feel like, Chelsea in the past have also gotten that treatment when people are fearful of them, I think. So maybe it's a badge of honor in some capacity to say that we're drawing the hatred once more, which is usually a sign that Chelsea are on the ascendancy in some way, shape, or form.
Look, there's positives and negatives of it. And the positive is the team are showing a spirit and a fight. And that is definitely good. We've accused them in the past of not always showing that since the sort of glory days. And obviously with them being a relatively new team and squad, you want to see that togetherness. So that is good, undoubtedly. And you're right, there have been some outlier matches, and you can always point to decisions that, frankly, you would question. And there's been a lot of yellow cards. Yellow cards have been thrown around like confetti in the Premier League, generally, to be honest with you. But, they got 105 yellow cards last year, which was a Premier League record. They're on course currently for 146 if they carry on at this rate of 27 after 7 games, which would smash all records. And clearly there is, what comes with youth is also a naivety. And they do have to sort it out a little bit, because at this rate, they're going to have a lot of suspensions. Cole's got 3 yellow cards, all for dissent, by the way. And you can't have players getting suspended for dissent, for instance. That would be ridiculous. And, the 2 who've already got their 5 yellow cards are going to do well not to get 10 yellow cards before the 30-second game now, which is the cut-off point for the 10 cards. So that's a 2-game ban. Nobody's ever got to 15 yellow cards in the Premier League. João Paulinho one year got to 14 yellow cards. If you get 15 yellow cards, you get a 3-game ban, a little known rule because it's never had to be implemented. But we've seen from Chelsea through injuries that availability is absolutely key. And they do need to sort it out a little bit. And I know Enzo keeps saying he loves it in press conferences, but I think internally they do know it needs to settle down a bit. They can't keep at the rate they are. And even allowing for some bad decisions and allowing for some outliers. 11 of their 27 cards this season have come for non-fouls or non-challenges. It's either dissent or arguing or over-celebrating. And you can cut those out very easily. And, Nicholas Jackson, I've been a big supporter of his over the last 12 months since initially questioning the signing of his. But he needs to look at getting away with what he got away with and think, I've got away with one there, and I'm not going to put myself in that position again, because he could have got a red card off the bench and it would have been a 3-match suspension. It would have been absolutely ridiculous. So he's got to think, I got away with that one. I'm not going to take that risk again. So just a bit more. And I do also wonder as well, there's this new rule where the captain, I say it's a new rule, but there's a rule where the captains are only meant to talk to the referees, and you can get booked for talking to the referee if you're not the captain. And obviously Chelsea don't have their regular captain, Reece James, playing. And I think having Reece around, if he takes on that leadership role well, could help a little bit as well. Because I know that Enzo Fernandez has been standing in, but I think there's a little bit of on-pitch lack of, I don't think lack of leadership, but just lack of discipline on the pitch. Someone just trying to keep the players disciplined on the pitch. And I think that can sometimes have to come down to your captain as well.
Do you think there would be if this kind of trend continued, Reece wasn't available, the on-pitch discipline is still a little bit shaky, would there be a player that you would feel like Chelsea should look to switch the armband to try to give them someone who can interface with the Premier League officials in a better capacity, to try to both keep the side a little calmer, but also maybe try to exert some influence on the match official in a more effective manner?
I mean, your natural instinct would say Levi, but Levi himself can be quite aggressive. Probably Levi, but not Cole, because I just don't think you want to put any more onto Cole. You want to leave Cole free, and you want Cole. Why mess with Cole, quite frankly? You don't want to do anything that might mess with Cole. So not Cole, even though it's kind of tempting, because he, not through his personality, but through the way he plays, he can actually be quite a leader in a way. But not Cole. So maybe Levi. But I mean, it is. I wrote a big piece about the benefits of their young team and their young squad the other day, and I do think there are a lot of benefits, and certainly in terms of trying to get long-term success. But it is one of the drawbacks you have to accept with such a young team, that you're going to lack a little bit of that leadership and probably a little bit of that discipline as well. I do also think, though, and this is a really boring point, that because it's so easy to get yellow cards these days, much easier than when the rule was first introduced, that the bar for when you get banned for yellow cards should go up. It should be 7 or 8 yellow cards, not 5, because that 5 yellow card thing was introduced when it was actually quite difficult to get a yellow card, and it's actually now difficult to make a challenge without getting a yellow card. And I do think the bar is too low. I think it's outdated, but that's quite a boring point and boring argument.
Well, I mean, Chelsea have 28 total cards. Nottingham Forest has 28 total cards. Man United's at 25. Like, we are not necessarily individually ill-disciplined. I mean, there's, I think it's the confluence of, maybe that naivety and the younger squad, but also the changing of how the game is officiated. So it does feel like an opportunity for a rules change in the future. Maybe if the Premier League can be united on that front, the teams in front of the FA could help push that change next season. But look, that's going to do it. This is our little international break update with Matt. He's going to enjoy some England national team football. He's going to have a little fun trip out and trek to Wembley. And we'll get back with him after the international break is over, after Chelsea start that run of fixtures to really determine where they're at. But Matt, enjoy the football, enjoy the rest of the international break, and we'll see you afterwards.
Thanks, Dan. It's off to Helsinki after Wembley for the Finland game as well.
All right. Well, you enjoy that. Safe travels. And until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.